The Penguins will look to end their 6-game losing streak on Halloween night, and Pat and I are going to discuss that right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Senator Ferlet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers, you can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. So it's spooky season. Happy Halloween to everyone out there. Hope you all have plenty of candy to pass out to the kids tonight and, of course, to eat for yourselves. I always go to the store, get myself a bunch of Reese's peanut butter cups, and I just enjoy sitting on the couch, passing out candy to the kids, and again, eating candy for myself because I'm going to feel like a kid on Halloween. But the Penguins, they'll also get to play on Halloween night against a Ducks team that is off to at least a fine start, 4-1. They just beat the Islanders the other night 3-1. And speaking of the Islanders, they have been really bad this year, right there at the bottom of the Metro with the Penguins. They can't score to save their lives, but the Ducks, they've been able to get some scoring throughout their lineup. We'll discuss that in a little bit, but some news for the Penguins today as forward Blake Lizotte, it appears, is making his season debut for the Penguins in this game. He took line rushes with the team in the morning skate. He has been cleared for full contact, and he was on a fourth line with Kevin Hayes and Anthony Beauvillier. So the lines, top line remains the same. Evgeny Malkin with Sidney Crosby and Rickard Rakell. And granted, I was a bit skeptical about that line earlier this week just because I usually don't like loading up Crosby and Malkin for an entire game. I like it in distinct stretches, but not for an entire game. But I ate my words at least last game, considering how great that line was. And honestly, the more I think about it, if this team is just going to be flat out bad, honestly, why not just load up that line and just let them have some fun throughout the season? But no surprise there. Drew O'Connor with Lars Eller and Valtteri Pustin. I like that Pustin is getting some time on the second line, especially after how he had a really good game earlier this week. You have Michael Bunting with Cody Glass and Noel Acciari, and then Kevin Hayes, Blake Lizotte, and Anthony Beauvillier with Jesse Puljujarvi as a healthy scratch. I still don't like that. I understand someone is going to have to be a healthy scratch out of this lineup, but it seems like to me you still need to be trying to see what you have in Puljujarvi. He's under contract for this year. He had a good camp in preseason. I really don't agree with taking him out. I understand that Lizotte is a regular. He was the only player that you signed this offseason to a deal longer than a year. So he's going to come in the lineup and play every game. But I still feel like you got to have room for Puljujarvi in there and maybe look to scratch someone else, in my opinion. But Pat, we were both pretty high on the Lizotte signing during the offseason. We like the defensive play that he's going to bring to this lineup, the way that he plays on the penalty kill. We're hoping that he can add to the depth scoring that this team has already had this year. What are you looking forward to seeing from Blake Lizotte tonight? Because it appears he is going to make his season debut, even though Mike Sullivan called him a game time decision. But we all know what that means. Usually he plays.
It does. That's a very obvious tell for Mike Sullivan when he says someone is a game time decision. That means they are more than likely, I'd put it at 95% to play, barring some sort of Simpsons style catastrophe on the way to the rink. But when I say this, I don't need the comments calling me a caveman or any of that kind of stuff, but he's going to bring some snarl to the lineup. He talked about this in his media availability not long after he was signed, that one of the things he prides himself on is being able to drag his team into the fight and play a game with some sandpaper. And for all of the flaws the Penguins have had so far this year, and boy, oh boy, have we gone over all of them, only 11 games in. But one thing that has been missing, and it's been missing for the past couple of years, is a pretty easy team to play against. And that's not me saying that they got to become big bad bruisers. They don't suddenly have to turn into the Florida Panthers and fight after every whistle and be a bunch of agitators. But you eventually, with the way this league is trending, with the way that this league says they want to make it more about speed and skill, but do the opposite with their actions, you're eventually going to need a guy in the lineup who's not afraid to mix it up. And that doesn't mean fighting. It doesn't mean dropping the gloves. It doesn't mean Jack St. Ivany jumping into the fray and getting into a fight, but you need a guy who is going to go into the corners and throw his body around. You need a guy who's going to be a pest, so to speak. And by all accounts, that's the kind of game Blake Lizotte plays. And having that on a fourth line with a guy like Kevin Hayes will certainly help. Because, yeah, is Kevin Hayes more of a playmaker than anything? Of course he is, but he's a big dude and he's not afraid to throw his weight around. So now you have a fourth line that can, at the very least, go out against teams and cause a little bit of chaos and have a couple momentum building shifts where maybe they get some extended zone time where they're playing a little bit more physical, or you have somebody on that line who's going to throw a hit that's going to wake the team up. So with him possibly getting back into the lineup, more than likely getting back into the lineup tonight, I want to see that kind of game from him. It might not happen right away because he pretty much said when asked about playing tonight that it's been a long few weeks or a month or so. So being with a new team, it's exciting. And now I get the chance to be in the lineup. It might not be the fastest start just because he's getting thrown into this after missing a few weeks and he's on his way back. But at the very least, I want to see him bring some of that energy he talked about tonight against Anaheim.
Agreed. And the Penguins, they can certainly use quite a bit of that, considering, again, they've lost 6 in a row. And it feels like in some of these losses, there's just really been no energy. There's really been no one there to really wake this team up. I think back to the days when the Penguins, didn't have it, at least during this core group. Someone like Patrick Hornquist would be on the bench, just getting everyone going, riling the team up and going out there and, making a huge hit. For example, I think back to Chris Kunitz at times as well. Blake Lizotte, he's not nearly as gifted offensively, of course, as those two players. He never will be. But I do think he can kind of do something that someone like Kunitz did, someone like Hornquist did, where, he drags his team into the fight. He lays a big check, gets the crowd revved up, gets his teammates revved up. He was known for doing at least a little bit of that in Los Angeles. So I'm excited for him to make his debut. I'm glad that he is okay after coming off that concussion because he was out for the first few weeks of the season. And, on a line with Kevin Hayes and Anthony Beauvillier, Hayes, he's the playmaker. Beauvillier, if you want to call him the finisher in quotation marks, I guess you can, even though I don't think he's been that good this season. Honestly, if it were up to me, I would think about scratching Beauvillier and just keeping Puljujarvi in the lineup. I mean, I would want Puljujarvi in the lineup no matter what, but if someone had to come out, it would be Beauvillier for me, just because I really don't think outside of that game against Detroit, I would say, he had the one good game in the Western Canada road trip, just hasn't really been too impressive. And right now, just with the way the season's going, I'm not really sure how much he's even going to fetch at the deadline at this point. So again, I would keep Puljujarvi in. I don't know why they're scratching him, but again, Pat, that's just my take.
I mostly agree with you. The other way I'm looking at this is I think Puustinen played pretty well against Minnesota, and you can kind of tell that there are two things we have learned about Mike Sullivan and his tenure as the Penguins coach. And that's one, if you're playing well, he's more than likely going to reward you with more playing time, including bumping you up the lineup. And I think at this point, Puustinen, after that performance against Minnesota, has certainly earned that. And the other thing, and this is more an NHL coach thing than it is just a Mike Sullivan thing, is that the tie goes to the veteran. And Anthony Beauvillier is the veteran. He's probably going to keep him in there. And I don't think this means all of a sudden that Jesse Puljujarvi's in his doghouse. He has spoken glowingly of Jesse Puljujarvi since the preseason. So he knows he has a good asset in him, and he's probably spoken with him and said, listen, you're not going to play all 82. There's going to be nights where you're a scratch. Keep working on what you're working on. And again, I don't totally agree with it, but you look at, and it's something we talked about going into the season before some injuries jumped up. There was a big log jam at forward, and sometimes guys are just going to be victim of the numbers game. And while, yes, I would much rather have Beauvillier out of the lineup over Jesse Puljujarvi, this is just kind of the world we live in. We can disagree with it, but we're going to have to, at the very least, analyze the team that takes the ice and not shake our fists about how if that was me, you know what I would have done. But overall, I agree with you, but that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
No, I hear you. I just think in this case, the tie should not go to the veteran at all, considering the veteran just hasn't really been that good this season. I would much rather reward someone who had the better camp, had the better preseason, and I think there's more to learn out of from compared to someone who, again, just really hasn't made that much of an impact, at least to start the season.
Plus, to your one point about Bolivier, I do think that they are showcasing him.
I'm sure
they're showcasing a lot of players, and they're going to keep giving him opportunities so they can inflate that value, and come March, they can maybe get something for him. But until Beauvillier starts showing something, they ain't going to get much.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the only reason that he's in the lineup, just because, again, he hasn't really been that good. And the same thing for Matt Grzelcyk. I mean, he's been terrible this season. He's playing on the top pairing with Chris Letang. I think that should tell everyone that they're just showcasing this guy to try and get something for him at the deadline, even though I think if you were to put him on waivers right now, I don't think any team would bite.
And that one, I mean, that's the opposite of a numbers game. You don't have a ton on defense,
right.
So you're just like, well, go out there and do whatever you can do, Matt.
Well, I mean, still, they're showcasing him, but he's just not doing anything with the showcase. But I think that would do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to preview this game against the Ducks, go into some players to watch and some keys to victory for the Penguins a little later on as well. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. This FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So, for example, when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, we're back here in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So, Pat, the Penguins will look to end their losing streak tonight against a pretty pesky Ducks team. You know, they're 4-1 to start the season. They're still very much in this rebuild phase, but this is still a Ducks team that has quite a bit of young talent. You know, leading the way this season, Troy Terry, 5 goals, 8 points in 9 games. He's really blossomed into one of the premier top 6 wingers in the league. Leo Carlsson also off to a really good start this year. 4 goals, 6 points in 9 games. He's going to be a thorn in a lot of other Pacific teams' side for quite a long time. Ryan Strom's off to a good year. Mason McTavish, he has 5 points in 9 games, but he still hasn't scored yet. Noted Penguins killer Frank Vatrano has 4 points. If you are a betting person, and we just had an ad for FanDuel, do an anytime goal scorer for Frank Vatrano, because it feels like he scores basically every time against the Penguins. But Terry and Carlson are on the same line. You have Vatrano and McTavish on the second line. Trevor Zegras is on the third line. And when I think of Trevor Zegras right now, just with the year that he's having, you know, only 1 goal, 2 points in 9 games. I think of that meme where it's like that guy's walking down the street. He looks into the window. I'm going to get you out of there. And I feel like that's coming at some point here for the Ducks, because I don't know what it is. He just hasn't been working out as expected, at least this last year and change. And I feel like a change of scenery might be coming for him sooner rather than later. The Ducks also haven't announced who is starting in net, but if I had to guess, it's probably going to be Lucas Dostal. The Penguins found out pretty quickly last year who he was. He was great in the game, for example, in Pittsburgh, and he has been awesome this season. In 7 games, 4-2-1, 2 goals against average, .943 save percentage. And I'll fully admit, when he came in last year, I thought this was just a kind of a random make-a-name goalie. No, he is very underrated right now, playing some great hockey, giving the Ducks a chance to win on a nightly basis. So while the Ducks may not be, I think, a playoff team yet, this is still a team that has quite a bit of young talent, and the Penguins are going to have to be on high alert for quite a few players on the ice tonight.
They will, and goodness, what a difference a season makes, man. If you remember when they blew that game to the Ducks around this time last year, I came on this very show and ranted and raved about who is this goalie? You got this no name in net. You didn't test them. You did all this stuff. And 1 year later, boy, I could not have been more wrong. This kid is the real deal Holyfield. He is very good. So if he starts tonight, the Penguins better be ready to get to the front of the net and make his life hell, because if they let him see shots, he's going to stop them. To your couple other points, yes, this is a young, talented team that's starting to come into their own very ever so slightly. So you have to lean on your veteran experience tonight. You know that this is a team that is not old enough to know better, but still young enough not to know better. So you have to lean on that experience, play a disciplined kind of game, and really almost choke the life out of them. Because if you let them get going, you let them feel themselves a little bit, that talent's going to take over. And while, yes, I agree with you, they're not quite a playoff team yet. A lot of talent there. You cannot get caught in some sort of a track meet or some sort of careless game. But like we talked about with our pal Jesse, neither of these teams are particularly good at defense. So it very well could just be a track meet born of neither of these teams can defend. So we'll see what happens there. And lastly, for Trevor Zegras, man, I don't think there's a world where the Penguins could get him, just because they're, if and when they do decide to move off of him, because it just feels like a relationship that's broken. It's not that he is a bust. It's not that Anaheim setting him up to fail. It just feels like the relationship has gone past the point of no return. But again, this kid is so good, and he's still got so many good years ahead of him. And a lot of people forget he's coming off a pretty injury-riddled season last year, so he never really got a chance to get his legs under him. And if he can find a stride this year, maybe that is the thing that repairs the relationship here between him and the Ducks, because there is a lot of talent there. And if he figures it out, between him and Troy Terry and a few other players, there is a nucleus on this Ducks team that could make them a really good team in the Pacific for a while.
Right. And the Ducks have some other prospects coming too down the pipe, next year, year after that. This is a very young team that's going to continue to stay young for quite a while. And the pieces that they already have up here are, again, mostly performing pretty well. You get to their defense, Cam Fowler is up there. You have old Penguin Brian Dumoulin on the second pairing. You have Mintyukov, who's performing at least well. You got Racco Gudas on the third pairing. Defensively, they're not obviously nearly as good as a bunch of other teams, but there is still some intrigue there. But you look at their underlying numbers for this season, and you're right. If there was ever a game that could be 6-5, 7-6, God forbid, 8-7, something like that, this could be the one, because the Ducks, they are woeful defensively. They have given up 251 scoring chances at 5-on-5. That is one of the worst marks in the league. They have also given up 105 high danger chances at 5-on-5. Another, again, one of the worst marks in the league. That's right up there with the San Jose Sharks, who have been awful at 5-on-5 for defense. Obviously the Penguins, the Canadians, and also surprisingly, Colorado has not really been that good defensively this season. But I mean, again, they have a defenseman playing on the third line right now. That just goes to show how banged up Colorado is.
I was waiting for you to get to that part. The Colorado Avalanche are going through the 2010s Penguins problem of, hey, everybody's hurt.
Yeah, literally, it's been that bad. I mean, they're without quite a few forwards this year, but no. Getting back to my original point, the Ducks are one of the worst defensive teams in the league, especially at 5-on-5. The Penguins, I know they can take advantage of that. We've seen their offense come out in virtually every game this season. But again, it all comes back to the other side of the ice and simplifying their game, breaking out of the defensive zone with clean control, not giving up those high danger chances. Again, the Penguins are one of the worst teams in the league when it comes to that, and also expected goals against. So again, I'll keep saying it. I know we sound like we're on repeat mode on this show for previews, but until they start playing committed team defense, we're going to have to keep talking about it.
Yeah, we really will. And if there was ever a night to get that in order, it would be this one, because it's a young team that, as I have said, not old enough to know better, but still young enough not to know better. And if you can play with some kind of discipline tonight, you can walk out of here with 2 clean points. And that will be exactly what the doctor ordered after this last week and a half stretch for the Penguins.
Agreed. And I think that will do it for the second segment of today's episode. Coming up in the final segment, we're going to look at some more keys to victory and which Penguins could potentially have big games tonight against the Ducks. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our last sponsor, and that is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less, at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. It's the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. It's the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. You can sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. It also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. For example, each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. So download the app today, use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. One more time, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So another key to victory, at least for me tonight, I want to see that top line continue to cook. That was by far the Penguins' best line in that game against Minnesota. I almost said Montreal for some reason, but don't know what the heck. I guess I am in spooky season today as well for Halloween, but there is another game against Montreal coming up later this weekend, of course. So I think I was just getting ahead of myself a little bit there. But against Minnesota, I should say, the Penguins top line was tremendous. I felt like that was the best Sidney Crosby has played since the Buffalo game, in my opinion. You get the 3 points. He was a factor every time he was on the ice. I think part of it was because Marc-Andre Fleury was in town, but now that he's out of town, I still want to see him get back to that level, and I want to see him do this more consistently. We've seen him do this throughout his entire career. He is going to play at a high level this season. I know it, even though he has started a bit slow, but I do think that line is going to cook again, and you can see it during the game. Evgeny Malkin knew where to go every time, even though he doesn't play that often with Crosby at 5-on-5, at least not for a full game. He knew where to go on the ice every time Crosby had the puck, and same for Raquel as well. And I do think that is going to play a big factor in tonight's game. I'm curious to see how they do. And again, I am hoping for a big time performance again from that line.
Same here. And I never thought I would have to say this. And I also should probably couch this as well. I don't think in any world that he's playing poorly, so to speak, but this felt like a way to get Sidney Crosby going, because while he hasn't played poorly, he just hasn't played up to the Sidney Crosby standard. And you load up that line, you put some talent with them, and you kind of give them a, hey, listen, we know you don't have Jake anymore. It's been a while, but we also know now you don't have Rust, that he's out with an injury. So here's Malkin and Raquel. Go nuts. So I'm curious to see what that line does again tonight, especially, as we said in the last segment, against a team that does not play particularly good defense. So they could and should feast on this team. The other thing I really want to see tonight, it's very similar to what I said about Blake Lizotte. Michael Bunting, man, it's time. And it doesn't have to be a goal. It doesn't have to be an assist, but I need to see Michael Bunting play Michael Bunting hockey, getting to the front of the net, getting into the dirty areas, being a pest, and just playing a hard-nosed game, because we've yet to see that from him this year. I can live with him not producing, because that's the life of a top 9 forward, especially one who's not an elite goal scorer. They're going to go through streaks where they don't produce. but I need to see him playing his game. I need to see him at 1,000,000 miles an hour, throwing body checks, making the goaltender's life a living hell, and just being the energy guy on this roster, because he has not been that. And again, this is another night where he can do something like that. He just has to play that kind of game. And if he doesn't, it might be time to start having a conversation about Michael Bunting.
I agree, man. I mean, he was so great last year, was everything they needed and more down the stretch. And I've just been sitting here wondering throughout the season, where has that player gone? I mean, you saw a little bit of flashes of it against Minnesota. You saw him go to the net a little bit more, get in the crease, get into his office. But a lot of these other times, it feels like he's allergic to going to that area. And it's like, man, you were making a living in that net front area down the stretch last year. You had 6 goals, 19 points in 21 games for the Penguins. Where have you gone? I mean, my bold prediction for him this year, I had him scoring 30 plus goals. That, it looks like right now, that might be one of my worst bold predictions of all time. I know it's only 11 games in, but I'm looking like a complete fool for that take right now. But it is past time for him to get something going. And I understand that top 9 wingers, especially in the NHL, can be streaky. You see that on a lot of teams, but you can't be this poor after what you showed everyone last year. And again, I don't even need him to play at that level for a full season. It would be awesome if he did, but I knew that wasn't going to be the case. But if you even play at a fraction of that level, it would make such a big difference for this team. So I just want to see him get his swagger back, honestly. And also one more thing, I want to see this team having fun, man. It feels like a lot of these guys, just watching them on the ice the last week and a half, some of them, just their body language, it feels like they look kind of miserable out there just with all the losing that's going on. I want to see these guys having some fun. That's all.
Yeah, and that is an underrated thing about this team right now, is you're dead on. They don't look like they're having fun playing hockey. And you look back at some of the best runs in this era of Penguins hockey, it just looked like they were having the time of their lives. And even in losses, you could see that they were like, hey, you know what? Rough one tonight, but we know we're good. We got this. We'll be all right. We'll figure it out. And that joy is kind of out. And if you can go out tonight, get an early goal or two, play with some speed, as Mike Sullivan likes to say, play with some pace, that is a very great cure-all, because that hockey's fun to play, and you're still given permission by this coach to play that kind of hockey. So why not go out and take advantage of it? Last thing for me, I don't mean this in a sense that I think he's been bad, but I need to see a little bit better of a game from Ned. I need him to command the net, look a little bit more like he did down the stretch. Doesn't mean that he's been poor, doesn't mean that I've lost faith in him or anything, but just a solid commanding performance tonight from him. Make the stops, look in control when inevitably Anaheim gets some kind of a push, be there to make a save and slow the play down when you need to. So want to see what Ned does tonight, because he is getting the start. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Play with a little bit of fun, have a little bit of joy in your game, and a good solid performance from Alex Nedeljkovic could go a long way to get this team 2 points and back on track.
I think all those are very fair. And also one more thing, hold a lead, please. Please hold a lead. Stop giving away leads in the matter of seconds to a matter of 1 minute or 1 minute and 30 seconds. When something goes wrong, stabilize. You don't need to wilt at the first sign of trouble. I just had to get that out. But
no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And I think on that note, I think that'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Pat and I will be back with another show for you all on Friday to recap this game against the Ducks and get you all set for Penguins Canadiens in the first game in November on Saturday, before 3 very crucial matchups next week against Metropolitan Division teams. But again, that'll do it for this one. Thank you all so much for tuning in. For Patrick Damp, I'm Hunter Hodes, and we'll talk with you all on Friday.